So we know this is kind of one of your maybe last sessions, so we'll try to be as fun and interactive as possible. I know a lot of you guys had some ice cream, so hopefully you guys will get a sugar rush through our presentation. So I'm Jinny, and Candace and I are really excited to share with you Salesforce's implementation journey through PDMS and beyond. First, we'll kind of start off with a quick overview of our company, and then we'll talk to you about our journey and what our goals were in the GRC space. And then we'll kind of transition into a deep dive of some of the innovative areas that we've kind of come across through our PDMS implementation. And then we'll, hopefully you'll be able to learn from that and use some of those innovations in your space as well. So kind of let's start with an overview of our company. I'm not very good at holding this microphone, obviously. Let's start with an overview of our company. So how many of you guys have heard of Salesforce? Okay, that's good. That's more than I expected. So for those of you guys who haven't, Salesforce is a leader in the CRM space, right? So we provide both B2B and B2C products and services through our platform and through our products like Commerce Cloud, Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and Industry Clouds. So we have this platform, right? The power of our platform is also enhanced through tools that we have in the innovation, in the analytics space, collaboration space, and integration space. If you guys have heard of tools like Heroku and MuleSoft, as well as Einstein. And we also have a learning platform, right? So our Trailblazer platform, our learning platform, and an application exchange. So for those of you guys who have heard of Salesforce, are any of you guys using us actually as a customer? That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
That's more than I was expecting.
I know, I was like thinking there'd be two hands up. So congrats on being part of our Trailblazer community. So, when a customer buys Salesforce, they're not just buying our products, they're actually joining a community of Trailblazers that really, we're all a community that we all want to help each other succeed along the way in their journey in Salesforce. And so one of our core beliefs is that, the business of business is really to improve the state of the world, right? So we want our Salesforce platform to be a platform for change by really serving the interests of all of our stakeholders. So what does that mean? That means serving the stakeholders of our employees, of our customers, of our partners, the communities that we serve, as well as the environment that we live in. And so, we've had a lot of success along the way. I would say, we grew from a $4 billion company about 5 years ago to a $13.2 billion company with about 30,000 employees across the globe. And, that's all great and good, but actually what we're most proud of is, being one of always on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for. So we've been on that for the last 11 years. And we're the top company that cares based on People's assessment. We're also named regularly as one of the world's most innovative companies and one of the most sustainable companies by Barron's. So it's really our focus on achieving all of this, as well as our focus on our core values that's really gotten us to where we are today. So Candace is gonna go through what our core values are.
Right, thanks, Jenny. So we have a culture of engaging our stakeholders through 4 shared values that we really think speak not only to how we try to operate as a business, but what is actually important to our stakeholders. Nothing is more important to us as employees than trust. And that trust extends to you as our partners, as our customers, again, as engaged participants in the technology ecosystem. So it's really important to us that we deliver trust to you, not only through our technology and our infrastructure and in the security that we provide, but trust it as a relationship, and trust in the sense that you're gonna trust that we will take care of your data and that we'll make meaningful decisions around your data and to protect that data. We understand that customer success is what will enable our success, and we believe in shared growth. And that's really held true for us. As we grow, our customers grow, and vice versa. We also understand that innovation is really, really important as we move into the 4th industrial revolution. And we also believe that equality and diversity makes us better as an organization and makes us better able to respond to the needs of all of our stakeholders. So as we talk about trust, because again, that is our absolute #1 core value, it's the #1 thing that we think about with any new idea, product, service, or even just minor changes throughout our organization, we're concerned about how to continue to protect the data that we're increasingly getting. So as we grow as an organization, we're acquiring more and more customer data that we need to be even more responsible for. And so that leads us to needing more operational processes around GRC. GRC is pretty instrumental in our continued trust. So who in here is implementing a GRC tool right now, or GRC processes that you're trying to improve upon? Okay, great. So we're hoping that some of the more operational processes and tools that we've developed will help you regardless of what tool you're using or how you're trying to develop your own GRC. So trust means that we're protecting data again, and as we gather more data, this means that there are a number of administrative processes that come along with that. And so in order to avoid getting really bogged down in minute administrative decisions without actually having a holistic enterprise approach, we need to standardize our compliance data, we need to reduce our audit fatigue, and we need to improve our risk profiling practices. And so these are things that a lot of organizations, including ourselves, have learned that we can get bogged down. These things increase as our growth as a company increases, and so the more we can do to minimize these and standardize these, the better off we're gonna be. And so that is, getting better at trust is what led us to Metric Stream, and in 2016, we implemented M6, starting with the SOX module, and we continued M6 implementation in 2017 with the internal audit, the enterprise risk management, and the IT compliance modules. So that was the beginning of our journey.
So the next year, after the initial rollout of these modules, oh, did it go? Oh yeah, no?
Nope,
Not yet.
there we go.
Okay. So after the initial rollout of these modules, 2018 was really a year of learning and iterating and really just getting used to, users using the tools and the modules that we had rolled out. Our next step was to really set up operational best practices and really figure out how to set up a steady state operational support model. So in order to do that, we actually brought in our IT team, and they have a really great PMO structure that helped us establish best practices in things like project management, project governance, as well as like release management, change management, and training and awareness. And one of the key areas they actually helped us with was really to build a scalable application support model for bugs and enhancements. So in the second half of 2018, we actually added a lot more scope and more teams to our Metric Stream tool. So specifically, like the policy module that I was in charge of rolling out would reach all, would reach all 30,000 of our employees. So in order to do that, we really needed to figure out how to maintain and scale our operational model. And we needed to operate like a fully enterprise solution.
Okay, I guess you have the magic touch, thanks. So when we talk about improving our GRC posture, when we looked to move from M6 to M7, we decided that we kind of needed to take a little bit of a new approach and be more enterprise driven. So we tried to look at all of these goals that you see here from an even higher level than we had before. So what we're doing here is looking to, again, streamline those three aspects of administrative processes that we knew we needed to increase efficiency on and reduce administrative overhead and really increase the insight. So all of these in some way are standardizing and aligning, are increasing our risk transparency, and are increasing efficiency specifically around audit and compliance. So all of these things are what enable us to make sure that the GRC information inside of the business is where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, and that it's available to all of the people who need access to it, but only the people who need access to it. Because again, we need to trust as our number one value means that that information is available to who it needs to be and only those people. So kind of a fine line there. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, so each component of the metric stream M7 solution helped us address one of those business goals, right? So for example, the metric stream M7 platform, which we rolled out earlier this year, is really gonna help us improve efficiency and help us streamline our data model, which we're actually gonna do a deep dive on next. So additionally, the SOX compliance module, which we also rolled out earlier this year, as well as our IA and IT compliance modules, really help us focus on reducing that audit fatigue and really making sure there's compliance accountability throughout the whole organization. The policy and document management module, which I was responsible for, has already helped us to align with internal and external requirements. And then the Einstein Analytics tool, which is actually one of our tools, and we actually layered that on top of our existing platform. That's really a really good analytics tool that'll allow our leaders to really get the information they want in the format that they want and when they want it in. All right, so I'll pause here, see if anybody has any questions. Yes.
Yeah. That's the policy management module? Yeah.
Yeah, so the way that we've set up our standards actually, so our standards are what's actually in the policy management module. So our standards are actually created to be a representation of our internal best practices and internal security strategy, as well as external controls. So things that you need for SOC 2 and ISO and all of that stuff, right? So because now that's kind of all being put into the system, and we're going to be actually mapping all of the controls that are in the compliance module to our standards. As well as incorporating all of the internal best practices there.
Did that answer your question?
So they're actually going to be mapped in the system. So I think there's different ways of, I guess, the way in which people look at standards, but our standards actually are the requirements that should be reflected through our controls, right? So our controls should all, not verbatim, be in our standards, but they should at a high level be represented in our standards, right? So we want to be able to report and say, this standard has X amount of controls tied to them that then tie to all of the X amount of areas of compliance, right? So if we say, like, I have a standard on authentication, that covers 6 controls across SOC, ISO, et cetera, right? So we can kind of have that visibility up and downstream if you think about like the relationships between a standard and a control. So we were actually storing our standards in a tool called Confluence before, which is really just a document repository, right? And so, the compliance team had the content already in M6, the M6 version. So we had this gap of like, well, we have standards in a document repository that won't necessarily link reporting-wise to the M6, to the M6 version. So we wanted to have all the data in one place. So we actually put all of the standards into the M7, version of PDMS, so that we could actually integrate all of that data together. Does that make sense? Yeah, no problem. All right. So now that we've kind of given you a little bit of background about our company, and what our goals were in the GRC space, let's look at kind of our first innovation area, which is really the information architecture governance space.
So what we chose to do here during the implementation transition was begin data modeling. And next slide. And so what you see here in the problem statement is actually 2 really high level things we were trying to address. One of which was what we already kind of covered about needing a consistent and efficient manner from the enterprise level of addressing the GRC space at Salesforce. The other thing that we needed to address, the other minor issue, was that in the M6 implementation, we used a lot of customizations, and that over time is not necessarily scalable and contributes to an inability to be efficient and maintain alignment across the organization, as well as alignment with our partners at MetricStream. And so what we tried to do was find a way that we could use the out-of-the-box platform as much as possible without hindering our processes that may not be exactly in alignment with metric stream. So our goal here was to create a consistent set of processes and have a supporting data model that would allow us to align, that also during implementation would allow us to identify where the changes are or where the delta was between the M7 module connectivity and our internal processes at Salesforce. Next slide. So what we did, and you can see this is a very high level example. We tried to be as specific as possible with each module, but we created a data model that showed data flows and connected attributes and elements. And this is not only within each process or each module. So for example, the policy team has process workflows where data flows and processes contribute to each other. But the risk management team, my team, has our own process flows and our own data inputs and outputs and flows between those processes. So we needed to do that within each department and within each module, and then we needed to do that cross-functionally. And so the data models that we diagrammed, and we did it quite visually. We used Lucidchart, but anything from Lucidchart to Visio would allow you to create these diagrams, really showed us the mapping that we needed to see. This gave us two really great advantages. One of them, again, is comparison from team to team. So if you had multiple teams using the same module who didn't necessarily have the same processes, it allowed them to come to alignment on that. It also then allowed us to evaluate where the deltas are between a particular process flow and what was happening in the M7 module that is associated. So the key elements that we included, you can see here, the data flow direction, specific users and organizations, hierarchy of data. We were able to map that to where that process took place in metric stream and see where we needed to make adjustments. And so that allowed us to say, well, is it really vital that we actually make this customization, or is this something that would be relatively easy for us to not create a workaround, because we really want the process to work for us in the way that we design the process, but maybe there is an alternative, or maybe we're not looking at it correctly. And so it forced us to align not only with each other, but with the specific data flows that were intended in metric stream. So we did that for each model, and you can see some of the mappings that we have here. It's obviously not a full map because it's pretty messy, but
yeah, we wanted to put it in, but we couldn't quite shrink it enough for you guys to be able to see anything.
But you know that risks are mapped to controls, and risks are mapped to specific users. But users are also, depending on the user, they might need to be able to see risks, they might need to be able to see controls, and they might need to make a change to a control that's then going to affect a risk, or vice versa. And the data model allowed us to see what would impact something else if we were to make a change to that data flow. You had a question?
So this flow is it like specific to your team, or across Salesforce after consulting all the teams, you have come up with this flow?
We did the flow for every team, and then we also did the flow from team to team. So, and the team-to-team flow is what was important to identifying what would have downstream impact if we were to make a customization to one module. How would that impact another module? Is it a process that actually impacts that, or is it something is it a customization we'd be able to maintain independently without having downstream impacts?
Yeah, like I was just wondering, some of the team might be interested to use area of compliance, or their flow might be a little different. So I guess this is something, the consolidated flow, or it can go in a different way as well.
Mm-hmm.
Bidirectional, or
Yes.
like process control you are doing, right? Sometimes other team might have area of compliance at the top, and from there it flows down to different.
Yeah. So there are multiple diagrams, and so the importance is understanding how they relate to each other and how different users might use the different models, and making sure that there aren't inconsistencies that would prevent data flow from the appropriate direction in the tool. Sometimes metric stream does, and that actually is one thing that we had to look at. Does metric stream for that particular data flow, does it allow bidirectional impact? So if you make a change to a control, does it then affect the risk score that that control is tied to, or do you need to go back and manually make the risk change? And so those are the kinds of questions that came up as we made these diagrams and then compared the diagrams. And then again, these are at multiple levels. So you have diagrams that show from the top down, where is the data going from department to department or team to team, but then within a team, where is the data going?
How is the experience of the hierarchy of data? Like, you would have got like the top Salesforce under that different entries, this is group, and then you have compliance or processes with respect to those different business groups.
Correct.
And later on, if somebody says, okay, we have different kind of things, then how flexible your the hierarchy is right now? Can it accommodate any new task comes from a different team?
Well, so we made sure that we were engaging the stakeholders that were going to be using that module from the beginning. So if there were multiple teams that were using the same module who don't necessarily traditionally work together, we made sure that they were coming together to make those decisions to see what would work best for everyone.
But does it Metricine provide that, like, say for you, this is the flow for PDMS, but there is a separate team who want to leverage the same PDMS app, but their flow is a little different?
You have to come to alignment. I mean, you're using the same flow. I mean, if you have slightly different processes, there may be different records or objects that would allow all of those to exist. But if you're talking about like the exact same process that's happening, that means we would need to come to alignment. And the advantage there is that that's creating efficiency. So it's easier to share that data because you're getting records through the same process, and the resulting data then means that you can compare it to each other. Because speaking from a risk perspective, if I'm performing a risk assessment in one way on the security risk management team, and the financial risk team, for example, is calculating risk in a different way, it's really hard for us to then compare and consume that data because you're kind of comparing apples and oranges. And so this forced us into an alignment that allows us to use that data from an enterprise perspective.
Just reflect upon one more point that are you all able to hear me? Yes. So we may be looking at from your question point of view, we may be looking at specifically for policy management point of view, but what Candace is reflecting here is more to do with risk management too, because there are certain areas we do want to have a certain way of doing things, because that does add to the efficiencies. Right? In the longer run, you have a certain patch that everybody's choosing. For example, when you want to score an issue as high, medium, and low, and somebody else wants to say something else, then it's an inconsistent data set that you're dealing with. So in the risk management world, that does apply very well. And in the policy management side of it, when you look at the application, you can actually create certain workflows, certain approval paths that can be chosen. So both those apply. I know we are getting into the details, but I think you get the essence of how Salesforce is adopted.
Yeah, and I just wanted to note that, we are continuously looking at the data model as well, right? We built the initial data model, but when there are changes that are coming in, right, we need to know. And if we decide to make a customization that might change the data model, then we go in and update that data model, right?
And just to clarify, that's an entity relationship model of the entire database of all them 7. So that's what we bring with us into these decisions, into this process, not just policy and risk, but the entire entity relationship model. So.
Yeah, so we're getting a little outside of, I guess, the scope of policy module, which we were prepared for, but good questions, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions about the data model specifically? Okay.
Okay, so once we established that foundational data model, right, we realized we needed to have a way to govern any of the changes to that data model. So we set up something we call the Data Governance Council. And so we set up the Data Governance Council really with a vision to keep the tool as enterprise friendly and as upgradable as possible while still maintaining transparency and scalability. Right? And we defined our key values for the council, which, these are pretty obvious, but, we wanted to meet critical business objectives. We wanted to limit any custom development, and really we wanted to also minimize stakeholder disruption, right? Because there are already teams that are already doing things their own way, and we wanted to make sure that we could try to meet, not disrupt what they're already doing. And specifically, we also wanted to build a system for the future. So what that means is thinking about future impact and not just saying, these are my immediate business goals and how do I design this solution so that it fits my immediate business goals. So that was kind of, oh, not yet, sorry, the values of the council. And after we kind of define the vision and values, then we could define the scope of the team, right? And what the deliverables would be. We also identified roles. So we had people who were the owners, the members, and the facilitators of the Data Governance Council. And we identified people cross-functionally who would be a part of this council. So I think we had about 15 people from all the different groups that were represented. And these people actually had to have deep knowledge of their own areas and also of their downstream impacts as part of the decision-making process, right? These members actually then worked together to create a decision-making framework and criteria. So the things they looked at were, will the feature that's being asked for actually be part of an M7 upgrade in the future, right? What's the complexity? So what's the technical complexity of the change? What's the cost? So a lot of times we needed input from metric stream for this, right? So we needed to understand, to do this, actually how much is it going to cost from a professional services perspective, right? But also from an upgrade perspective, if we were to upgrade, what is the cost on that? And also they looked at things like, the number of end users affected. So how many people would actually, if we made this change, would benefit from this change? And finally, they also asked for an ROI. So they actually asked the requesters to provide an ROI estimate so they could actually evaluate the change. So, once we established the framework for that, we actually had to get into the nitty-gritty of like how, the decisions were made, right? So we had to set up the operational processes for that. So if there was basically a determination made that the request would change the data model, the business requester would actually have to raise a request. We had an intake form that was set up, right? And so in the intake form, the business requester had to put in a business justification, more than 2 words, like actually a full business justification. They had identified pros and cons, and they had to demonstrate that they had actually looked at other solutions, right? And be able to talk about those other solutions. They, like I said earlier, had to identify who their target user group was and the number of users affected, as well as the complexity. So kind of once they submitted that, then there was an analysis done by the council to just make sure the request was valid, right? And they had all the information they needed. And then the council met about once a month, right? They would review the requests. And then basically, it was, the business requester had to be there at the meeting and talk through what their justification was, talk through the alternatives, and really convince the council, to be honest, right, that the request was valid and that this customization should be approved. And so kind of after that review, right, a decision was made. So you either approve or reject, right? And actually the decision had to be unanimous. So if there was one kind of dissenting vote or denying vote, that person on the council actually had to provide the requester with, an alternative solution that would actually fit their needs. And so once that approval was provided to metric stream, then they could go ahead and do it, or our Scrum team, right? So you'll learn a little bit later on that we actually had a team that was actually a Salesforce team that could actually put in some of these enhancements as well, right? So we didn't rely solely on metric stream to do these things for us.
Jinny,
Yeah.
could you, so one person on the council would be a dissenting vote, and then there would have to be another cycle of analysis around that dissenting?
I think definitely there were some, if there were questions raised, they might ask them to go back and like look into more detail. But usually if it was a deny, like the decision was to deny the request, then it was a deny the request, yeah. Right. Yeah.
So I'm at the beginning of my journey in connecting or doing actually the analysis of the gaps. So could you share with me what is the trigger for you to say this is something that I should allow for a customization or not? Is there a trigger, something that you use as your denominator or your decision tree?
Yeah, so I think definitely when we started off on this M7 journey, we had a out of the box mentality, right? So we knew that some of our teams would have to compromise or change the way that they're doing certain things because we wanted to stick to out of the box. So I think definitely even for me in the PDMS journey, right? Like there were some things that I had to just compromise on and say, okay, I'm okay with the way that it is in PDMS, even though that's not how I would have ideally done it. But I think the customizations that we did choose to do for PDMS were the ones that impacted the largest number of people. And we knew that people would not be able to, for example, utilize the tool in the way that we know our users, right? Because like we know our end users potentially have been used to this, and then we're going to completely switch the way that they're doing it, and they're going to have to do 5 clicks instead of 2 clicks that they're used to now, or something like that, right? So really, the customizations that we focused on pushing through were the ones that we knew would have the biggest end user impact, right? The cost, honestly, some of them were fairly minimal, like from a couple grand or so. So there wasn't a big difference in comparing this customization versus that customization. I think it was really like an end user impact piece of it.
And we do keep track of all of the decisions. So everything that goes up for a vote in front of the Data Governance Council is documented, including the discussion points and then the justification for approval or rejection. And over time, you start to see patterns of what you as an organization actually find value in for customizing. And so it gets a little easier to for those on the more tactical level who are deciding, well, I guess we can kind of make a modification here to our process, or this is really important for us to customize, let's put it in front of the Data Governance Council. That decision gets a little bit easier over time as they can see why the Data Governance Council is making the decisions that they are, and it just gets more and more efficient over time.
And in some cases, it was like, is it going to be painful for me as the the admin team administering it, or is it going to be painful for the end users? And I'd rather it not be painful for our end users, right?
Take into account the roadmap or being able to influence the roadmap. Sorry, ma'am.
That's what I was gonna ask, actually. Same my question.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you've got something that is really a great idea and is going to improve the product, then the product team is going to want to hear that and maybe pull others in our customer community to get a critical mass to get it moved up in the roadmap.
What a great idea. That actually would be a really great community workshop idea.
Actually, that's what we do at Fannie. So at Fannie, we call it a change review board. So that was actually one of the questions, was there a reason why you call it Data Governance Council instead of just a review board?
Well, I guess because it's internal to Salesforce, it's not something that, it's not a product we own. It's MetricStream's product, and for us, it's so ingrained in our process that we're governing the data just as much as we are like what's happening with the tool. So if we make a change in the tool, it's because it's so integral to our process that it's because of our internal processes. It's not just a tool change.
But going back to your question, the product management team at Fannie meets with their consumers of all the module owners on alternate weeks, and then we consume whatever comes in. Technology sits at the table, and then any requests that are approved, we do take it back to the product team and we figure out if they have it, and then, is it coming as part of the service packs? Or is that something that is so unique to us that we have to actually make the change?
Yeah.
And in the M6, we try to poll and get involvement and feedback. And we've been doing that with the product groups for a while, but I love this. And what you're doing with Penny, I've known, and probably about 10% of our customers are formal in this way and have a good, mature process in what future requirements are, and they're disciplined about scoping out changes. So I'm thinking this is a really good thing to just, take to the M6 and show these processes so other people can learn. And,
Yeah, as of yet, we haven't done that, but I think that's
a lot
great.
more streamlined going back to product.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
The next M6 to share this with everybody.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so you might ask, so what were the outcomes? What was the impact of this Data Governance Council? So over the 8-month period, we probably reviewed about 50 different requests, and we minimized the number of customizations that people were asking for by about 40%, and that, at the end of the day, saved us about $150,000 to $200,000. And, we're actually expecting that amount to increase significantly as we put more modules onto M7. So, this Data Governance Council is, has been and will continue to be really a platform for our process harmonization, as well as, what everybody likes at the end of the day, which is saving money, right?
And total cost of ownership.
Yeah, total cost of ownership. Awesome. So I know you guys have been good at asking questions along the way, but I'll just ask one more time. Is there anything else you guys wanted to ask?
We have two more to go over, but
Yeah.
do you have anything specific about the Data Governance Council?
So
Yeah. So our standards that we have in there are actually, so we're using it as an end user portal, right? So all of our 30,000 employees are expected to go in there and read our standards. They love that. All of our 75 standards, they got to go in there and log in. And it's integrated with our SSO, so they can access it through our main portal where they can access all of the other enterprise tools. Oh, sorry. No, it's implemented. We're using the PDMS module, so metric streams policy module. Yeah. Yeah, so we had put Einstein Analytics on top of it, right, to create like a really, I would say, robust reporting capability and metrics. And because we can also do mobile on Einstein Analytics too, so a lot of our VPs like to see data like on their phone, on the go and stuff. So that allows us to provide that access to them.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Einstein, the user interface is still the metric stream module, but then Einstein on top of it allows us to do the analytics and the interpretations of data from the data sources that are pulled from the M7 module. So the reporting is through our own platform, but the user interface, the user experience is actually metric stream.
Yeah, and we have a lot of integrations with other tools. Like, so if you think about other parts of the process, like we have something called the Grand Unified System, which is also a Salesforce tool, right? And we're, for example, like the requests for if anybody wants to change a standard, right? They submit a request through an intake form that cuts us tickets in GUS, right? And then we're actually doing a Kanban style approach to make updates to our standards. And that's actually, an integration with our tool, with our Salesforce tools.
Do you enable,
Oh, sorry.
do you enable policy approvals through mobile as well?
Not through mobile, no. Yeah, it's just on the web app. Yeah.
These policies and standard changes are for the Salesforce customers' contracts for Salesforce?
I mean, they could actually affect customer contracts, right? Because so our standards actually cover all sorts of different topics, right? So we actually have about 73 standards that cover like the 18 NIST categories. So they would actually affect potentially our customer contracts, right? But they're supposed to say like, what are the things we're doing to protect our customer data, right? We're putting sorts of encryption in place. Like we have certain access controls in place, right? So if you think about all of those things, like it's a broad category, but potentially they would have downstream impact to the customer contracts. So right now, since we rolled it out end of January, I think I've had about 1,200 users that have accessed the system, but that's because we're actually doing a soft rollout. So we've only targeted certain groups to say, hey, our systems don't use Confluence, start using metric stream. Because what we realized is there were some people that, just weren't even aware that we had standards, right? So we needed to take a different, more, I would say, in your face approach, right? For those users, whereas the ones that have already been using them in Confluence, we just tell them, go use metric stream, right? And so we have about 1,200 users, but it's going to be targeted towards all 30,000. So actually the license, for example, the
Plus contractors.
Yeah, the plus contractors, right? So anybody who has at salesforce.com can access the standards. And in terms of the number of documents, we have 73 standards in there, but then we have all sorts of other supporting documents that are in there as well. We're linking our implementation documents in there. We have like a glossary of terms in there. We have a lot of like other appendices documents. So we're creating all of the documents in line in the system.
How do you map these to other libraries, like requirements and various compliance? Is that they've not registered?
Yeah, so the compliance module is going to be onboarded, I would say, in another 2 quarters. But once that is in place, all of the GRC foundational objects will be mapped to our standards, plus areas of compliance, plus risks.
Yeah, so the data model really was more forward thinking because even though that was developed as part of the PDMS module implementation, it really was to anticipate downstream impacts of implementing the policy module.
Awesome. So now that we've kind of looked at how we've managed the consistency of our data, let's shift gears and look at kind of some innovative best practices and how we implemented our UAT and then application support models.
Right, so we tried to really formalize the user acceptance testing experience, and this, through setting specific milestones and deliverables and really giving everything hard dates and deadlines and setting very clear expectations, we were able to incorporate continual learnings as we went along much more efficiently. We got heavy involvement from the business owners. And this was all because we had an organized formal process. So we started preparing for UAT about 6 weeks before, 6 weeks before kickoff. And so that 6 weeks, as you can see here, really allowed us to formalize the test scenario creation, write those test scripts, get them vetted by a number of people, route them for approval, make sure that we had the right participants. So we included identifying who should be involved, and then checking and rechecking with the stakeholders in those modules to make sure that the people who are actually going to be using this module on a regular basis had a chance to test it out. This also allowed us to prepare for the data migration, because remember, we were moving from M6 to M7, and so we wanted to make sure that this happened in tandem. I won't go through everything individually, but essentially, we wanted to make sure that everything was signed off and that everybody who was participating had access 1 week beforehand. Then, by the time we got to the kickoff for user acceptance testing, we had ready to go a log that so users could start, log in immediately after the kickoff, like the minute after. They could start logging any issues that they found, any unexpected occurrences. They also had the ability to log enhancements that aren't necessarily bugs, but would be a better user experience. And because we had all of this organized ahead of time, we were able to then hold daily meetings to review that log, see if we were getting common issues, common enhancement requests, and begin testing those and getting those fixed immediately. After our daily triage meetings, we could report on how many use cases had been tested by how many participants were done completely, how many issues did we have versus enhancements, how many were we able to fix 1 week into the 2-week UAT, like did we have, of the 73, or I'm making these numbers up completely, but of the 73 issues and enhancements that were reported, X percentage of them were exactly the same, so it actually wasn't 73, it was 55, because so many of them were recurring or something like that. And so that really gave us insight into how we were progressing throughout UAT. We also held daily office hours in case anything unexpected happened. That wasn't necessarily an issue or an enhancement, it was a problem with UAT itself. So one of the things, this process worked really, really well for us. One challenge that we had that in retrospect we wish we would have done differently was we only allowed a couple of days between the ending of user acceptance testing and production go live. And that led to a number of quality and data issues that we weren't anticipating. And part of that was the number of issues that came up that we weren't expecting during UAT, but in retrospect, we would have left a couple of weeks, might have been a little more appropriate between ending of UAT and production go live. So that's just one thing we recommend for everybody that came up during the retrospective. Okay, and I guess we can hold the questions till the end so we get through our last.
Yeah. Next slide. All right, so our next innovation area was in our application support model. So this is the model after we go live, how we support our users and any issues that come up. So, though we used our kind of standard ticketing system that we use for all of our enterprise products like Workday, really the difference here is we designed a multi-tier support model. So we had 3 different levels of support, and these were actually staffed by the business team, so like my team, as well as the IT team, and then the metric stream team as well. And so, I think that this tiered support model, because we had different tiers, what it forced us to do was to be very specific as to like what are the use cases that each tier is going to support, right? And so we went to the level of like defining, 50 to 100 use cases of like this, this one's going to be addressed by this one, and then it gets sent to this tier, and then it gets sent to that tier. So I think that was, a shift actually specifically from M6 as well. But the other major shift was really the involvement of the business team. So, my team was heavily involved in addressing a lot of the issues that first came up with like the content, and if like the users had any issues, right, directing them to the proper intake for us as well. And so additionally, another really innovative thing I think was the tier 3 support model. So this actually, they formed this as a scrum team. So this was staffed by Salesforce people, right? So Salesforce IT team. And they actually took an agile lean approach. So they would do 2-week sprints to put in enhancements that were requested by the business. And these enhancements were actually prioritized in bi-weekly meetings. So all of the business stakeholders would get together and we would talk about the end user impact of the enhancements, and we would decide what that scrum team would work on. And the scrum team would then go ahead and push through 3 or 4 different enhancements every 2-week period, right? And that's actually worked really well. And then, most of the time metric stream is focused on fixing any bug fixes that are coming into play, but they actually are very closely aligned. I think it's pretty cool, but one of the things we specifically targeted to do was to actually hire ex-metric stream people in India to help us staff that, GRC Scrum team so that they could help, the onboarding times were reduced because we were able to do that. They knew the tool really well. And so, though we're kind of still continually trying to improve the timeliness and quality of that support model, it's actually been really good so far in our 2 rollouts and supporting any of the end user cases. But, obviously, we'll work to streamline that moving forward. So, yeah, now we're going to just talk about next steps and, what's on our roadmap.
Yeah, so like we mentioned, we've implemented PDMS already. We've also implemented the SOX module, just coming out of that. Next, we're going to be implementing a common controls framework in the IT compliance module, an issue management workflow in the issue management module, enterprise and security risks within the ERM module. And then we'll also, after we have all of these modules implemented, be looking to roll out policy management as a service. And so that means expanding the PDMS module to any other stakeholders at Salesforce who are interested in getting their documents uploaded. And so that's what we're looking to do. So thank you.
Through end of 2020.
I don't know if we have a minute still for questions. I know we're almost at time. 2 minutes, okay.
I just wondered, your Scrum model where your team runs in 2-week sprints for enhancements, were those the sort of enhancements that were previously approved by the Data Governance Council? Okay.
Yeah.
So but that council meets presumably on a monthly basis, I guess. So
Well, they actually were doing emergency, like they would do things, approvals via email, or they would have emergency requests set up, like emergency meetings set up, if there were urgent like features or enhancements that were requested to be reviewed.
kind of died down over time.
Yeah, it's important to be kind of flexible with that. Like they do have a monthly scheduled meeting, but we also try to make sure that, for example, that falls right at the end of UAT, so they can review everything that came out of UAT.
Since you had an internal government team, how do you make sure that those changes, enhancement, will accuracy of product being delivered?
There was engagement with metric stream as needed.
Yeah.
I can't speak, I guess, to the development aspect of it. I know that you do have to look at how does that affect existing code.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely close collaboration between that GRC Scrum team and metric stream to understand, basically that impact, right? And that was something that the Data Governance Council looked at. They wouldn't approve things if they knew that it wasn't going to be upgrade safe. But we had to get that input from metric stream, right? Because they kind of know it best.
Is that something that you feel is necessary? Because in my case, I don't have a government team, Jack. I don't plan on doing that. I'm buying it, I'm going to implement it. I don't have sources available for me to do that. Is this something that you feel is required to make sure that we have a product that will be sustainable?
You mean a governance council?
No, the Scrum team that you have there.
Oh, no. I don't think that's necessarily. But I mean, I think it is a pretty unique model that we are staffed, our IT team is able to support this. And it was actually their idea to set that up in order to address all of our enhancements. But I think there's different ways to set it up. Right?
Yeah, that's definitely a business decision that is going to depend on how close to out-of-the-box functionality you're trying to stick to and whether your organization is willing to invest in an extra resource like that if you are going to stray. Like we knew even with the Data Governance Council allowing us to cut down on customizations, we knew there would still be some customizations. I mean, the tech space that we're in just means that we're going to blaze our own trail, I guess.
Well, and so the IT team is basically helping us, I would say, maybe not replace completely, but if we didn't have them, you would either need to have somebody on your team that knows how to administer the tool really well, like a system admin, right? So train somebody in using System I capability, and or you would probably need to procure metric stream professional services to support that.
I think the answer also depends upon organization's appetite, how many users are using support, those sort of metrics too. Because when I look at Penny and Salesforce, they're looking at like 30,000 users, and it's a large volume of users there.
How about 65,000?
5,000? That's a lot. But
So I was wondering.
no, I was going to say that, and I think for now, what would be helpful to understand is that such a model exists. Such a model can be supported by external tools. And then if you ever want to go down that path, or if you want to choose to go through that path, you can. Certainly, they're looking to it later on. Of course, it's the business you make in 2 months or 2 years from now, when your business may change, you may decide to try something else. You have a model to do that.
And we're out of time, so thank you.
You guys, that was really fun.